Hey friends, I'm Kirk.
And I'm Zach, and this is the Gardener's Companion Podcast.
Each week we'll have garden tips
Potential pitfalls to avoid.
and a community where we can share, learn, and have fun growing together. And this week we're going to be discussing common diseases that you might encounter in your garden and how to prevent them, and if you get them, how to treat them. As we've said in the past, the best fertilizer is a gardener's shadow. Well, it's also the best security system because, like, when you're out there in your garden, that's the opportunity for you to scout and to look for any signs of these diseases that we're about to talk about. And Zach, go ahead and kick us off with the first disease that we have on our list.
Yeah, and we wanted to bring this up a little bit because we think that, in general, trying to be preventative is always going to help. It's one of the key things, and it's definitely plays into the gardener's shadow element of this, is if you are preventative, you have less of these problems in general. So we wanted to talk about some of the things you might see and how you can deal with them. So one of the really common ones is anthracnose. It is a fungal disease that warm, wet weather is its best friend. It is also kind of tricky to fight against that in Florida where we are. So this is a very common one down here. And you will see it a lot on tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers. And that also kind of includes, you got beans in there as well, your entire cucurbit family.
And then strawberries get them pretty bad too.
They do. And then fruit trees also can get them. What you're looking for here is small little spots. And it kind of looks like it's bruised almost. So it looks like somebody pushed their thumb into like the fruit. And then basically, as it gets older, it also turns dark or like a orangish pink color. And then on leaves, you'll also see irregular yellow or brown spots. And then you'll see dead tissue in the dead center of that. And so you'll see kind of like holes starting to appear everywhere. But a lot of times you will see this on fruit kind of first. And then you will basically just see kind of indentations on there. And a couple ways to try and kind of prevent this, specifically anthracnose, is they breed a lot for resistance to anthracnose because it's very, very common. And so a lot of times you'll see, like on your hybrids, that's one of the things that they're targeting, is trying to be more resistant to anthracnose. This is mostly transported through water. And so if your plants are like heavily wet, you need to be very, very cautious of how clean you are being. And that just means your tools, your hands, anything else. There's several of these varieties that transmit through moisture. And so basically you have to make sure that you're being as clean as you can, because you're going to go out there and you're going to remove damaged tissue. Things that have anthracnose are not going to come back. So if you have a tomato that has an anthracnose spot, it's not going to like recover it.
Yeah.
So you can just remove it. But then once you remove it, you want to make sure that you're not touching healthy elements of that plant with either your gloves or your tools or your hands, anything like that, because you could transport the disease to other areas of the plant that aren't currently being affected. And another good one here is copper fungicide. You'll hear that one a lot. Copper fungicide is one of the most common organic options because there's a lot of synthetic options for fungicide. There are not as many on the organic side of things, at least that are as effective as the synthetic ones. So copper is a very effective one. Definitely make sure you read your label. Don't do anything that's not described in the label. But other than that, copper is it's going to be something that most of the people listening here are going to want to get some copper fungicide because it helps in a lot of ways.
And that's a good point you make that I kind of want to talk about at the beginning of the episode, so I'm glad you mentioned it, is that when it comes to these diseases, prevention through like environment is probably one of the best things that you can do from the beginning if you're trying to do any kind of gardening organically. It's really hard to get to once you have these diseases to turn your plant around. It's pretty hard on a lot of these because there's not that many options on the organic end. So pay really close attention if you're wanting to be an organic gardener to our prevention methods, because I feel like that's definitely what you're going to want to focus on.
Yeah.
So the next one,
sorry. But yeah, commercial growers or synthetic growers, conventional, whatever you want to call them, they also benefit greatly from having the environment be really good. All of these things, all of these practices work both ways, really. And I think we've talked about before, but just organic gardening is just a little bit slower. So when you're dealing with one of these diseases and you're growing conventionally, there's almost always a spray, a synthetic spray, a chemical that you can go spray out that's going to basically immediately address these issues.
Mm-hmm.
You're still going to have damage, like we talked about. You're not coming back from damage on a leaf. It's not going to like regrow. It would essentially just abort that leaf and start a new one. But conventional growers, or if you use synthetic fertilizers or chemicals, it's much, much faster. And so the kind of prevention and thinking about these things ahead of time and doing as much as you can to try to not give these things an environment to thrive in is key for organics, because you can't react as quickly. The chemicals aren't available the same way.
Yeah, no, I agree. The next disease that we want to highlight, and it's something that is very common to gardeners, especially on tomatoes, and that is called early blight. This hits a few other plants as well, but the tomatoes are the ones that kind of really stand out as susceptible to early blight. Now, this lives in the soil, and it essentially splashes onto the leaves of your plant, and it can spread that way. And it will look like a bullseye. It's the first thing you're going to see is like a little brown spot on your leaves, usually the lower leaves. You can kind of see it traveling up your plant if you get it. And if you look closely at the brown spot, you'll see concentric rings, like really small circles. And then there's also what you can see there's sometimes like a yellowish circle around the circle, so it's like a halo that kind of really is indicative of this specific disease. It starts at the bottom of your plant and works its way up, turning basically all your leaves to mush. Like they'll turn crispy and they're going to just be gone in a very short amount of time if you don't get in front of it. This is something that a lot of people get, but yet they can turn their plants around, through environmental reasons or environmental situations. One of the main things that is recommended is to rotate your plants, and this is recommended in most agriculture in general. Rotate what you're growing where, so that bed that you're growing your tomatoes in doesn't constantly kind of keep getting more of a heavier load of these spores of this to be able to transfer. And the most important thing, and this is the easiest solution, is just remove the lower leaves of your plant. Anything that is remotely close to your soil, trim those leaves up. Granted, you don't want to do that when your plants are super small. Wait till they get big enough that they have enough leaves above that area to still photosynthesize well. But that's the easiest way to prevent getting it. If you don't have anything that can get in contact with the soil, or the soil to even splash onto it, you won't have this issue. That's why usually if you see it in tomatoes, it's fairly early before you can start trimming. That's when I've seen it get on ours. But then you just take those affected leaves off, throw them away. Don't put them in your compost. Just keep them separate. Just throw them, somewhere else. And I've prevented it from spreading pretty effectively. And I do believe that copper would work on this too if you got it and it's still starting to spread and it's already gone maybe halfway up your plant and you can't, trim all those leaves off. I think copper will turn this one around too.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point that everyone should also think about. If you are removing diseased tissue, do not put that in your compost, because if you do, you have introduced that disease. It's just like, it's a little thing, but it will make you have better compost, because some of these are like a soil-borne fungus. A lot of these, there's an interaction with the soil. And so if you have diseased tissue, I know it sucks to like have to just throw it away, but trust me, it's worth it. You don't want to store anything that's has disease or fungus on it.
There is another foliar spray that they say that would get rid of this, or preventative. This is a 1 tablespoon baking soda, 1 tablespoon Dawn dish soap, any liquid hand soap, just the original, not like any scented ones or anything like that, and 1 quart of water, and spray your plant preventatively. And that'll help with most of these, to be honest. That dish soap will get rid of a lot of these funguses or bacteria that can start these diseases. However, you also have to remember that dish soap is going to kill your beneficial bacteria as efficiently in some cases. So I don't recommend going too heavy with the Dawn dish soap or a lot of these sprays. To be honest, you want to do it, as directed on the label, and as infrequent as you can. In moderation, should I say?
Yeah, if you go out and spray every day, you're going to get different problems. So it's basically just you'll dial it in over time. You'll get the hang of it, but you want some prevention, but you don't want to overdo it. But yeah, our next one is botrytis. This is a very common one again here in Central Florida. A lot of times you'll hear about this on strawberries. Even commercial growers are dealing with botrytis. That is definitely a thing. This is a fungus that attacks dying and wounded tissue. It's very, very common in humid, stagnant air. That is very common as we approach towards like the end of spring.
Foggy mornings, the worst.
Yeah, because basically you're just getting moisture all around the plant, and a lot of times that fog will sit there until sometimes 9-10 o'clock before it kind of burns off and goes away. And so that is just an absolute breeding ground for botrytis. And yeah, it's really gross. This is if you've ever seen like a strawberry that is just like melting and is fuzzy and gray. It like literally the strawberry melts. It just falls apart. And so you will notice this one because literally the fruit will like melt and get this gray mold growing off the top of it. You'll also see it on like fading blooms or on old flowers, basically. Same thing. And a lot of times this is why, so you'll see it a lot more in ornamentals like roses and things like that, where they're like, you must deadhead. All deadheading means, if you're unfamiliar with the term, is just removing old flowers once they start to fade. The reason you do that is because some flowers have the propensity to getting these diseases on them. And then you're essentially just creating a space where your plant can develop a disease. And so removing flowers once they're starting to fade or anything that's diseased is going to definitely help you. Way to kind of do some preventative stuff here: increase air circulation. So that includes making sure that your plants are well trimmed. Don't worry about like, you don't have to go through and make sure there's no leaves in there, but you want to kind of be able to see through. If you see, let's say you have a garden bed and you look at it and all you see is a wall of foliage. That's also essentially what the wind is seeing. It will find a way through there, but you want to make it so that's really easy for air circulation to just go through your entire garden, because that helps you on basically all of these.
It does.
If you have it really, really tight, no air can get in there. It also is a breeding ground for bugs. So you will benefit a lot from maintaining your plants and removing some level of the foliage so that this is all going in there. It also includes removing dead flowers and plant debris, so any leaf that's like looking dead, just go ahead and take it off. It's not going to come back. So just go ahead and remove it so you don't have a potential host for one of these diseases. And then simultaneously, it gives you more airflow. Then there's also, and we're going to talk kind of about some of the general good practices for preventing all of these issues here in a little bit. But trichoderma is a recommended specific fungi, a beneficial fungi for anthracnose specifically. So that's a good one. And then also some diluted hydrogen peroxide. And hydrogen peroxide is another good one to look into if you start running into a fungal disease. You have to be careful because hydrogen peroxide absolutely can burn your plant. Do it at the recommended, on basically any of these things, if you are trying to kill something. So we're trying to kill fungus in this case, or bacteria. But if you're trying to kill something, if you don't do what is recommended, you could also kill your plant. With organics, it's kind of one of those things where, well, with anything really, if you're trying to kill something and you put too much of it on there, you could kill something you're not trying to kill. So just be very careful when applying basically anything foliar spray.
Yep. And the next one is powdery mildew. This is something that is super, super common in your cucurbits.
I would say this is maybe the most common one that people will run into at home.
this is one that we hear so many people come in and be like, my squash was doing great. And then all of a sudden it looked really bad. And they will show us a picture. And like, yeah, that's powdery mildew. It is very easy to spot. Think of botrytis in a way, but on a whole plant. Like it makes your leaves fuzzy. It looks like mold growing because it is essentially, it's a fungus. And it likes dry, warm during the day, but the humidity at night. That's when it really like thrives, is to have a humid plant matter at night. That's why it's so important. I know that we're going to probably talk about this later about when you water your plants. It's much better to water early in the morning so that all day long your plant has time to dry out than it is to water late in the evening or right before dark or at dark. It's much better to water early in the morning. So it's a pretty easy one to spot. It literally looks like someone has like peppered your plant with flour. Like you'll see like these little white spots starting, and then they get a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, and then eventually your leaves start dying in those areas.
It looks like you took powdered sugar and dusted your entire leaf. And I'm talking sometimes on your squash plant, it's a huge leaf, and the whole thing is just covered in white.
Yeah. Again, this is one of those ones that if you've got good airflow, if you've got good sunlight, this won't have as good of a opportunity to take foothold in your garden. Like Zach said, the most common thing as a preventative method in all of these is going to be to make sure there's good light and good airflow. I've said this so many times in some of the videos we make for social media, because it's the best way to prevent a lot of these things. Also, not over fertilizing. That can sometimes lead to it, especially if you're using synthetic fertilizers. That can sometimes make your plant weaker in certain aspects, especially when it comes to disease, if you're over fertilizing.
Yeah, and then I would say number 2, most common that people will run into at home, it's called Pythium. There's a couple other versions of it, but we'll stick with just Pythium for this example. But what we're talking about is root rot. And I would say, aside from powdery mildew, which you basically, if you grow a cucurbit in general, so cucumber squashes, and you are growing organically and you live anywhere it's humid, you will get powdery mildew at some point.
100%
but
guaranteed.
The second most common, I feel like, is root rot. And so what this is normally, it is caused by too much moisture staying in your soil. Normally, this is essentially like, think about it this way. Your soil can only hold a certain ratio of water and air. Your plant roots need both, if possible. Well, they need both.
Most people don't realize that. They need oxygen.
They do. And so if your soil is only water, it has pushed out all the air in there, and then you start to develop things called anaerobic bacteria, which is just bacteria that grows in a low oxygen environment. The vast majority of anaerobic bacteria are negative and will cause major issues on your roots. Some plants are more susceptible than others to root rot. I will say that peppers are one of the most finicky I've ever seen as far as moisture levels go. But if you keep many plants wet at that level for too long, you develop anaerobic bacteria, they colonize on the roots, and if you get root rot, that is a dead plant. So It's a very, very hard one to come back from once you kind of tip over that corner.
Yeah, the symptom of Pythium is my plant's dead.
Yeah.
That's basically the symptom.
So I would say it looks like very similar to it doesn't have any water. So the plant starts to get like wilty, and then it starts to yellow, and you're like, oh, I haven't watered enough. And then you water again, and it's done. Because basically it just gets all wilty and sad, and then it just dies. It just falls over dead. The other thing that's very, very sensitive to this is very small plants.
For sure.
Because when you're germinating something, when you're growing microgreens, or basically just germinating in general, your plant has one tiny little root to start with. Yeah, I'm talking sometimes it's like a hair basically, and it cannot absorb a whole bunch of water. And it has very little like other defenses. There's no other roots it can go to. So if that one gets overwatered and develops any kind of negative bacteria, dead. They call that damping off. It's literally it just falls over dead. So you'll see, it basically just dies, it is the funny one. So basically, if you get this issue, it's sometimes better to move on, and we'll talk a little more about that later on. But there's a lot of things you can do to help this. So make sure you are not overwatering. I know that is a tough one. It is a really tough one to tell people how much to water. I still think maybe the best thing to say is you want your soil moist but not wet, because basically if you pick it up and you're just feeling all this weight of water, you're likely overwatered. You want it to feel like it has something in it but not like heavy. If you pick up your pot and it's heavy, normally a bad sign.
Yeah.
You can add a bunch of beneficial fungi. There's a bunch of beneficial bacteria and things that you can add as well. And we'll talk a little more about kind of all the how that all is going to play into it in just a little bit. But basically, what we're trying to do is make sure that it doesn't get overwatered. Some people take that into mixing in things like perlite into their soil because perlite can't hold water. You might see people put like a layer of rocks at the bottom of their pot. Same idea there, is there's always a place for water to drain down to. One that is kind of a weird one to think about, but it's true. If you get a pot that has no drainage holes in it, be very aware of that, because I've also seen people absolutely kill their plants with that, because most of your decorative pots at the big box stores and everything you get do not have drainage holes. And they do that because when you water inside your house, then you don't shoot water everywhere. The problem is then the water sits in there, and you can absolutely murder houseplants this exact same way.
I didn't realize till just recently that you weren't supposed to plant straight in those pots, basically.
I don't. I that's my way to fix that is plant in a normal pot.
Is you're supposed to plant in a normal pot and then put it into the decorative pot, and then when you want to water it, you take it out.
Take it outside.
And then you go water it outside, then you bring it back in. I didn't even realize that. I've never been a houseplant person, so I didn't know that until recently. I'm like, why are there no holes in the bottom of these? I'm like, oh, because you're supposed to put it in a nursery pot inside of that pot.
It's basically a pretty little outer shell that you can put on so you don't have nursery pots in your house. But yeah, that's another one that it seems like just kind of like the silly thing. But if you plant directly into a pot with no holes, you have to be very, very careful, because it will literally just pool up at the bottom, and then that area is going anaerobic. And so then you have kind of introduced the stuff that can give you root rot. And a lot of the houseplants are very sensitive to that too. They don't like being overwatered. And so it's a good example of, all right, be careful here. You want it to be moist and not wet. You want it to drain.
If you just now learned that you're supposed to have your houseplants in nursery pots and not directly planted in those pots, don't feel bad. I just learned that too.
I mean, I learned it the hard way, where I was like, how am I supposed to water this thing without like it just filling up? How am I supposed to know? So I just started doing that because I was like, this is dumb.
All right, so before we jump into our core principles and how to kind of like really prevent all of these diseases, we wanted to highlight our favorite place. It's where we get all of our garden supplies, and it's also where we work part-time. It's Grace's Garden Center. It's in Temple Terrace, Florida, right outside of Tampa. And at this time of year is kind of like one of the most exciting times of year, because everyone is getting ramped up for their spring garden. And every square inch of under the light space that we have inside that store is full of tomatoes and plant starts.
Yeah, definitely keep an eye on our social media posts, because there's I'm sure going to be one that is literally I should try and calculate the amount of square footage of heirloom tomatoes that are about to be growing and are currently growing. Honestly, they really do emphasize at Grace's, and it comes from a deep passion for it that has been the same way for 20, 30 years at this point. They care deeply about helping people learn how to grow organically.
Yeah.
And so if you have questions, just yesterday we were talking to people basically the whole day. That's the other thing you see a lot of times at the beginning of the season. People come in and they're like, you know what? I know that it's getting nicer outside. I want to learn how to do this. And I promise you, and it's one of the things we talk about at the end of every episode, you can learn to do this. And Grace's is an absolute great way to do that. So if you don't want to learn this in a vacuum, online, because we've also talked about kind of how that is. Now you have to discern things. They are happy to talk to you about kind of whatever problems you're having, however you want to grow things. So if you were in the Central Florida area, please come by Grace's. We think you'll have a great time.
Yes, we'd love to meet you. All right, so jumping into the core organic principles that you can apply for any of these diseases. Now, again, this was not an exhaustive list. There's definitely more diseases,
There's more.
but this was a consensus. Like I talked to Steve, I was using my brain, and then me and Zach talked about the most common diseases that we hear of that are kind of broadly seen in a regular gardener's backyard. There are specific ones. There are rare ones that you can get. It's like Pokemon. Got to catch them all, but not
Except
fun.
don't do that. Don't catch them all.
But most of these, about 80 to 90% of these, can be prevented by doing the following things. And the number one we have on our list is soil health first. It's very important that if you have a well-balanced living soil that you can kind of help feed, it's ideal for all of these diseases. You build a healthy immune system. That is your immune system, is right there around the roots of your plant. It will prevent colonization of bad stuff if you have a bunch of good stuff already there. So compost tea, compost in general, not raw manure, but like composted manure or homemade compost. Maintain good drainage. Most plants need good drainage. You want them to be able to breathe. That's the most important thing, is the breathing part. Yes, they need to drain, but there needs to be able to be oxygen there for the roots. Again, it's one of those things that most people don't think about, but plants need oxygen even in the root system. But this also helps if you have good aeration. It helps with the microbes in the soil. Worm castings are an awesome thing to put in your soil to create really healthy living soil, and avoid overwatering. Let those plants dry out between waterings just a little bit. Like Zach said, moist soil, not wet soil.
Yeah, and I think this is a good time to talk a little bit about microbes. So most of your organic growing is going to include them at some level. A lot of times they'll be in whatever soil mix you have. There's a lot of additives that are essentially just adding microbes. Where this helps, nature is essentially always in this kind of checks and balances situation. There's always these like natural processes happening. This microbe attacks this one attacks that one. And so there's always this balance. Where you run into problems many, many times is when the balance is out of whack. Nature hates a vacuum. And so if you were to put in something completely sterile, if one of the bad guys gets in there, it can just go crazy. There's no checks and balances for it. There's nothing to stop it from going crazy. And so one of the main really beneficial things about adding all these microbes is you are creating a balance. You're creating a wide diversity of microbes in your soil. And if you've never read about some of the amazing things that microbes can do, it's awesome.
It is really cool.
There's some that help the transport of nutrients very specifically. Like there's some for phosphorus, there's some for nitrogen. There's some that are really good at stress prevention, so there's some that make it so your plant can go through a drought better. There's some that can make it through your plant goes through heat stress better. It truly is amazing. You will get a ton of benefit, and that's why a lot of times people recommend compost teas and worm castings. You're putting in a very diverse set.
That's the purpose of worm castings is for the beneficial bacteria that worms exude when they're decomposing matter.
Yeah, and you get the plus side of like a trace mineral type pack as well from worm castings, because worms are awesome. And so you get it's a really, really good additive. It's not like a traditional fertilizer. I think we've talked about that before, but it's so much better, because one of the ways we've talked about a lot is it's kind of like taking a probiotic for us. You basically set the soil up to be able to process everything quicker. And if you're growing organically, the way those organic nutrients are getting into your plant is the way that nature does it, and that's microbes. Microbes are breaking down big pieces of things, and they're making it into small pieces that the plant wants. And so you want to have a diverse and thriving microbial population in your soil.
You want to have a diverse, you want to have diversity and a balanced ecosystem within the soil and above the soil. That's what you're looking for. Like Zach said, you don't want there to be an imbalance, because that's when a bad guy can really take over, because you don't have any good guys colonizing there already. So when you have the opportunity to colonize your soil or to spray your plant to get the leaves colonized with beneficial bacteria, it's always a good idea to do that because it just helps with the diversity that you have there. And then it doesn't have, there's not a vacuum. There is no space for the bad guys to take a foothold.
Yeah, and you'll see a lot of times they'll even do seed treatments that are essentially a microbe. And the reason they do that is so when those first little roots come out, they are already no vacancy for the bad guys. They put the really good stuff in there, and essentially there's no room for the bad guys to kind of take a foothold on your roots. So basically, take a look into microbes. They're fantastic. They're awesome. They're going to make your garden better, and it's just using nature in a way that it already had figured out, and we're just figuring out how to put it into our gardens.
Yeah. Yeah.
So our second kind of category of things that we wanted to mention is airflow and sunlight. We talked about this, but trust us, it is very, very important. So
we're talking about it a lot for a reason.
Yeah,
Because it's so important.
It
and
will
it's
save
such
you
an
so
easy
much
one.
headache.
It's such an easy one, but yet if you do this one thing, all of your gardening will be so much better.
It honestly makes it easier to get into your garden too. If it's nice and like flowing, you can get in there. But basically, you want to not overcrowd your plants. Don't get us wrong. We ride that line. We definitely ride that line.
Yeah,
we
we do.
plant because we don't want like empty space in our garden. We totally understand that. We don't want it either. We plant heavily. But you can get away with it a little better if you're really on top of your pruning. So you want to go in there and get rid of lower leaves because, okay, think about it this way. All of your leaves are solar panels for your plant. If these leaves are at the very bottom and they're mostly seeing shade all day, don't worry about them. It's okay. Don't go into the very top of your plant and just take everything off the top. Start low. Clear out all that stuff low where it gets really dense. If it's not getting like full rip sunlight, it's going to be okay. It's going to make new leaves. It's going to keep going, but you will save yourself a ton of headache by getting all that airflow through there. And then basically for the vast majority of plants, the more sun you give them, the better. I say that because there are some which if you do that, they will die. Houseplants will die. Ginger, turmeric will die. So basically, if you have like an understory plant, you don't want that. If you have a plant that comes from essentially a rainforest, you don't want to give them full sun. Most of our production vegetables and things, however, want as much sun as you can possibly give them. And that also, like we were talking about earlier, it helps dry your foliage out so you have less chance to pick up some of these water-transmitted diseases.
And the third tip that we wanted to mention is water correctly. Just be cognizant of your watering. Do it early in the morning if you can muster that, if that is the opportunity that you have. Obviously, if the only time you're able to go in your garden is in the afternoon, you got to do what you got to do. But I would even recommend possibly getting a automated system so that it will water for you early in the morning, and then you can supplemental water in the evening, only the places that dry out. That's still what I would recommend because it'll make your life so much easier. So water early in the morning, water the soil, not the plants, not the leaves. Most plants prefer not to get wet on their leaves. It's just, it helps keep that disease pressure down because as we talked about so many times, moist environment is where most of these bacteria and fungi thrive. So if the only danger area is the soil and you've pruned your plant to be far from the soil, then you're keeping your environment in a much more balanced way so that it can dry out between waterings and you're not going to have as much disease pressure. Use drip irrigation if you have the opportunity. I know a lot of people like to mulch. We do and we don't. It depends on the situation.
Yeah, it depends.
I'm still a little bit riding the fence on mulch because I kind of like to see the moisture of my bed by visually looking at it, and it's easier to feed and stuff like that. But I think that there's a place for it. If you're in an environment that stays too humid and you're having too much splash onto your plants from your irrigation or whatever, then put mulch down so it'll keep that splash damage down. So it'll really help in that way. Let the topsoil dry slightly between your waterings. All of these little micro changes make big differences in your garden's health and well-being.
And our last one, and I think it's an important one. It's being really sanitary when you are doing any of these cleanups. So basically, if you see anything dead on your plant, go ahead and remove it. It just removes a place where bad stuff could grow. I would recommend, because it's what's been great for me, get a tiny little spray bottle and throw isopropyl alcohol in it. And the
Yep.
reason you want that is because if you were out there cleaning up your plants and you cut off a dead leaf, or basically in between things, spray down your pruners with some alcohol. It takes about 2 seconds, and it just helps you try and not spread this stuff around. And then basically crop rotation where it's really great, because like Kirk was talking about, the one that's just soil borne. So basically, you think that all these spores are building up in the soil. If all you ever grow there is one plant, it just never stops building up. But plants are susceptible to different things. And so if you mix it up, then eventually those spore numbers go down for the one bad one, and then they go up for the other one. And then you switch it before they can get a foothold. Because, I remember the funniest one like that is it was watermelons, right? Where they only want to grow watermelons on
new land.
New land,
Yeah.
because there's a disease that gets in the soil, and basically you have much worse yield the second year. And so that's the most extreme version of that I've really kind of heard of. But it basically, it's just kind of like the rule of it is, if you have a plant there and you start letting stuff build up in your soil, it can get on top of you. So crop rotation is a great thing, not only for that, but also for using all available nutrients, because some plants use nutrients differently than others. And so it just makes it so you use all of the nutrients in your plant, in your soil.
So to kind of wrap all of this up into a nice tiny bow for you guys to really, if you're taking notes, take these notes. These are just some weekly things that you can do as a prevention routine. Number one, check your plants. This is the whole thing we're talking about. Listen to your plants. This is when you're out there, look at the leaves, look at the stems, look at your soil, look at the fruit. And that's when you can, if you have a disease, you can notice it at this time. Also, if you have any pest, you can notice it at that time. Very important. Listen to your plants. So check on them weekly, multiple times a week if possible. Remove the diseased material. Again, don't put it in your compost, but remove it from your garden, remove it from your plant. Sanitize between doing that. Apply compost, tea, or neem oil to your plants as preventative. This is the neem oil, it has a little bit of fungicidal. Most oils will have a little bit of a smothering effect on a lot of these bad diseases. Neem oil is not super strong, but it helps prevent stuff. So it's a really good preventative. So think of neem oil as a preventative spray. And the compost tea is to inoculate the leaf. Rhizosphere? Is that what it's called?
Phyllosphere.
No,
Rhizosphere is the roots.
Yeah, is the roots. Phyllosphere. So that's the bacteria that are living on the vegetation of your plant. It's called the phyllosphere. So spraying compost tea puts a good army of good guys out on your plants to help, fight any bad guys, keep them from getting a foothold. Adjust your watering to make sure that you're just getting your soil and not your plant material. And last but not least, prune for airflow. Prune your plants, even not the disease material, but prune your plants just so that you get good airflow. Make sure you leave enough leaves so they can still photosynthesize well. But if you do those 5 things right there, I am telling you, you are leaps and bounds ahead of a lot of people, and you're not going to have as many issues as many people that are starting the garden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then basically there's lots more of this, but we wanted to give just kind of some basic information so that everybody can feel empowered to try to reduce their disease impact. But we also wanted to bring in a plant of the week this week, and we talk about it enough, we thought that we'd dig a little bit into it, and it is the tomato.
La tomate.
Yeah, it's honestly one of our favorites up at the shop, because we probably have 50 heirloom varieties that are growing right now.
Yeah, there are so many tomato plants in the shop right now.
And people are so excited by it too. Like, we've reached that time of year where people will come in and just be like, are they ready? And we're like, not yet. Hold on. A couple more weeks. They'll go look at them and see how big they are, because technically they could take them home, but they're like an inch tall and they're in the danger zone. Basically, if you do anything wrong, over, underwater, too little light, too much light, they're dead. So we're like, how about you just give us a couple weeks to keep an eye on these, and then you come back in. But it's a very exciting time of year, so we wanted to talk a little bit about them. So most historians think this was found in South America, and you also saw this. You saw this in like a couple different countries in South America, but you also saw this starting to happen in Mexico as well. And then the conquistadors from Spain basically took this back to Europe and started this whole chain of things that happened that basically made the tomato as culturally significant as it is right now. Because when you think about it, most cultures have a very specific, very important tomato dish.
Yeah, and I think that most people, if they haven't looked into the history of the tomato, would have thought, oh, Italy's had tomatoes forever. Like that's where they originated from. Because when I think of tomatoes, I think of, caprese or bruschetta or, all these really
Red sauce, yeah.
yummy things. Red sauce. Yes, exactly. But it wasn't even until like what was it? I forget the dates, but it was not originating in Europe. It originated in South America, and it wasn't until the Spanish conquistadors brought tomatoes back from that region that Europe even knew about them. And at first they were scared of them. They thought they were poisonous. They nicknamed them poison apples. So it was but it was Italy that was the first European country to really embrace tomatoes and start using them in their dishes. And that's probably why we think of it as Italy being the originator of the tomato, because they were the first Western country to, well, I guess the first, because South America is definitely, but you know what I mean.
I am seeing that it was 1548 when there was writings
1500s.
about tomatoes in Italy. So they had a lot of time to perfect their craft, and they have done so. It is really interesting to see kind of like how that all worked. Like the U.S., Britain, and all of Europe got this in the 1500s. Then we trickled in there. But there's early references of these growing in America from as early as 1710. Thomas Jefferson tried these in Paris and sent seeds back. So there was probably some of these grown in Monticello. And there was basically there's a awesome, I highly recommend, just go look into the history of the tomato. It's pretty cool. And since then, we've also been breeding the crap out of the tomatoes.
Right.
And there's plus minus to that. I knew there was
a lot. I knew there was a lot. I did not know there was this many.
Because, the original looked kind of like a cherry tomato. Less structured, basically, than anything you'll see these days. But now there are over 10,000 tomato varieties.
10,000.
And a lot of these, there was... the plus minus of this. There's 10,000 varieties of tomatoes. That's a great thing in a lot of ways. There's all different colors, shapes, sizes, growing patterns. Like it can grow in basically anywhere on the planet at some level at this point now. And so there's that part. The downside is a lot of people think that some of the reason that the taste is not great is because we started breeding for one shipping, which you will see that across any produce. They breed so that they can ship well. And that is not at all taking into account how this tastes. Normally, it's kind of the opposite of that, because you're looking for a tough fruit that's got like a thick skin. You're not really concerned about having a high sugar content, which reduces shelf life for most cases. Mm-hmm. And so basically, the other part of this they were trying to breed for was them all ripening simultaneously. So they didn't want to have to go through and kind of constantly be picking. They wanted everything to be ripe. They go pick the entire field. They're done. And so that also hurts the flavor profile, which is why we have become very popular with heirloom tomatoes, because these are old varieties that have not been bred into oblivion and still have very rich tomato flavor. So if you've been looking for that, just search out some heirloom tomato varieties. They are all over the place. People are very, very passionate about them. You can find a delicious tomato.
Everyone's got their favorite. I'll give my favorites real quick. My favorite cherry tomato, flavor-wise, is a Sun Gold. My favorite producer is obviously a Berry's Crazy Cherry because it produces so many. And then my favorite visual on a cherry tomato would probably be any of the bumblebees. I love the bumblebees. They're awesome.
I have a sunrise out in my backyard right now, and it's beautiful. Like yellow orange color. It's fantastic.
And then on my beefsteak variety, it's probably a Paul Robeson, but I really love the Berkeley tie-dye, the pink Berkeley tie-dye. It's so pretty, and it tastes great.
It's also
Tastes
gigantic.
awesome. And it gets big.
Yeah, the Berkeley tie-dye is an absolute enormous tomato. I'll throw out that, like, I tried that bread and salt variety last year. It's definitely like they call it ox heart because it's definitely like a heart-shaped tomato. Man, it tasted great. It's also pretty big. I think the one I got was over a pound easily.
I think that's the variety that we got a 2-pound tomato from last year.
They're big. But yeah, there's all kinds of awesome tomato varieties. It has an awesome history. It has impacted cultures across the entire planet now. So that's our plant of the week. The tomato is a great plant. You should all try it out.
So that also brings us to our question of the week. And I think this is a very poignant question to our discussion about disease prevention because this is one of the main factors that can cause Phytophthora, and that is having a too heavy soil. So the question is, how do I lighten heavy soil or dense soil?
Yeah, we had a customer come in yesterday, and I ended up talking to her for quite some time that morning because she's like, okay, what's happening? All of my plants look terrible. And as we've talked about in this episode, that's basically what you're looking at for root rot. They just start looking sad. They start falling over and dying. And so I ended up talking with her for a little bit. I was like, okay, when you pick it up, is it super, super heavy? And she's like, yes. I was like, okay, is it like heavily composted? Because this is also something to be aware of. Compost is a great additive. I am not saying that it is not. If you end up having too much compost, it holds a lot of water, and you can run into these issues. And so basically,
it can go anaerobic very easy.
So quick. And so it's just something to be aware of. It just teaches you how to use compost, not saying don't use it at all. But her mix was too much compost. And so basically I was like, when you water, does it dry out or does it seem to never dry out? She's like, oh, it seems to never dry out. I was like, okay, I think we're onto the problem here. We have too much compost. We're holding too much water. So then what do you do next? There's obviously a ton of options, but basically what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to add something that is drainage facilitating to that soil. Because I told her, I was like, if we have a root rot problem, you could try to limp your plants along, but honestly, it might not be worth the time. It might be worth, let's amend the soil and then go again. And so what she ended up taking was a product called Pro Mix, which is basically just peat moss and perlite. And that's all there is to it, because both of those products make sure that you get good drainage. And I was like, just take your soil out of those pots, she puts it in a wheelbarrow. And I was like, you might even have to go to like a 50-50 mix of the Pro Mix to your compost to get it light enough so it's actually draining. But then, in theory, you have functional soil again. That's all it takes. Just add some drainage.
That is a beauty of, this disease, that root rot, because if you let your soil dry out completely, it'll basically kill the disease. It just has to have been dried out completely. If it stays in that anaerobic state, it'll never go away. It'll just stay in that compost or in that soil. I know that there can still be some spores and they can come back and stuff like that. But as a whole, if you let your soil dry out, even mixing it with the soil that she has, it doesn't mean she's automatically re-inoculating, as long as that soil can start drying out on a consistent basis. So yeah, mixing with something like that, adding perlite,
cocoa fiber,
there's a lot of different things that you can add to your soil. But yeah, the main thing would be amend your soil in a way that is adding aeration, that is adding drainage. You can even go as far as like LECA, or what
hydrogen or expanded clay pebbles. They're called all kinds of things.
Or some, like, they have a really small lava rock that's very similar.
Pumice
all
works
of those,
there.
Pumice stone, all of those things will help build an aerated mix that'll let your soil dry out between waterings, which is very important for preventing diseases.
Yes, it is.
That is how you lighten heavy soil. So guys, thank you so much for listening this week. Like rate, review on all the places wherever you listen to this. It really helps us out. We're a fairly new show, so every single subscriber, follower, and all those kind of things, it goes a long way when a show just starts on any of the platforms. So I appreciate every single one of you that have already done that, and if you haven't, go ahead and do that. But yeah, we will be back next week, and don't forget, y'all be kind to one another.
And there is no such thing as a black thumb.